Hey, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a good day. As you can tell by the title of this video, we're going to be talking today about some of the things that are evident or appear to be evident in America that would constitute what I would call a transformation or a shifting of American values and American government. So it'd be interesting. This will be a bit longer video most likely because I want to take my time with it. There's a lot here to cover, and honestly a lot of this could be covered in a lot more extensive ways through other videos or even books. So that's not my goal here today, but I do want to share some of my thoughts and some information I've been able to gather and to put it out there for discussion, as I usually do. And we're just going to work through some of these things, but what we're going to talk about is some of the foundational changes that are taking place right now in America, some ways in which we've been breaking or disconnecting from the Constitution, and try to delve a little bit into my thoughts for what God's plan for America is. And I know that's kind of really the foundational question, the base question is, believers, what is God's plan for America? And without that, we're just going in different directions and trying to figure things out and getting single-tracked and distracted by a lot of things that are going on. So I figure we want to talk a little bit about that as well. Excuse me, to put some context to it. All right. So basically all this is really is a primer. And like I said, it's probably going to be a little bit longer. So if you need to take a pause here and go get some refreshment, do that and come back and I'll be here. All right. So what's meant by foundational change? As you know, America is what they call a representative republic style of government. You've heard it called a democracy, but it's really not, because we elect people to represent us in Congress. You could call it a democratic republic, I guess, which would sort of be a intermingling of terms, but it's a representative republic, which means we have people in government to represent constituents, right? Every state. And so we have, in Congress, we have a House and a Senate, and each one of those has different roles and responsibilities. So one of the tenets of a representative republic is elections. And not only elections, but free elections and integrous election processes. Without those, it basically becomes worthless. And so there was quite a few questions, obviously, during this last round of elections, and this is not the first time the question of election fraud has come up. And there's been cases proven in the past, but it really hasn't. And it's actually, I think some races have been decided, not really a presidential race, but some Senate races have been overturned or needed to be decided by investigations, recounts, this and that. So, and then, throwing out of the illegal votes and things like that. So that really is the base tenet of a representative republic. And when we see election fraud, potential election fraud and manipulation of ballots and things like that, it does throw a lot of things into question, and it erodes the confidence of not only our system, but also our elected officials. So that is a key tenet, and we're seeing that messed with more and more, it seems like, we see more what I would call socialist / Marxist aspects moving into our day-to-day lives, or at least putting a lot of pressure on our Constitution at this point to have more control over our day-to-day lives, to erode our freedoms, to lessen those things. We're seeing This happened through attacks and tearing down of our police force, movements to defund and make the streets basically ungovernable, cities burning with no plan to stem the violence, portraying the police as the bad guys. And I'll just say right up front, I am certain, beyond a doubt, that there are bad actors in the police force. And it's quite possible, and most likely, that there are attitudes and processes that need some serious reform because they are slanted in a more militaristic way. And then you have people's personal biases that come into play. Every officer is an individual. Every officer has a history, a perspective, a past, a set of beliefs and biases that they bring into the job. And so they exercise those biases, those beliefs, those prejudices, all come out in the course of them doing executing their job functions. So we have sort of a stew there, to break down, to deconstruct, they call it, I guess, and say, okay, where's the real problem here? Is it in the processes, or is it in the people? Is it in the style of training? Is it what we expect our police to do? Is it how we arm them and equip them? Is it how they patrol, areas they patrol, this and that? So the bottom line, though, even with all that, is that statistics do not bear witness to the response of riots, looting, and burning, vandalism. They do not warrant those things. What we're seeing here is promotion of certain events, magnification of certain events that are happening through the mainstream media. We're seeing a biased mainstream media with a certain agenda to cover things in a certain way from a certain perspective at a certain frequency and in a way that pushes their point, right? In a way that communicates their position on things and what they want you to hear. All right, this is not, I'm not pointing to any particular news source in general, but there are enough out there right now where you can find balanced news. If you work at it, you can find balanced news. You can find factual news. And I find it very interesting that some of the longer standing and storied news organizations are not changing. They are continuing to promote certain viewpoints, certain aspects. Control of the media is big in this movement. Okay, control of the media and what people ingest, what people see, is huge. But there's such tremendous competition out there. So if we don't have to watch a single news source. We can watch multiple news sources. We can go online. I actually haven't watched television in about 5 years. No live television. Don't have it in the house. Maybe 6. I do get some news online. I get it through sites that are varied in nature. And I try to avoid the ones that are hard right and hard left. And so I'm really looking for something that is factual. And I find it very advantageous to look at some stateside news sources as well as international news sources, because I also want to know how the world views America. What's happening in America. And actually what I'm finding is they're feeding off the same news that is playing here in the United States, so they have the same perspective as what's being played here, which may or may not always be accurate. All right, another thing that we're seeing right now is how the worldwide pandemic has been used to create more dependence and control on government. Restrictions of freedoms, freedom of speech, which obviously includes the freedom to assemble peacefully, including the ability to how we practice one's faith, We're seeing worship services shut down. We're seeing police show up at churches now and telling people they cannot worship, and pastors standing up to the authorities and saying, no, you need to get out of here, leave now, because it's private property, you're not invited, whatever. You're overstepping your boundaries. We're seeing attacks against the Second Amendment due to what we're seeing on television. Coverage of gun crimes and violent crimes is very emphasized in the media, and this does create a lot of angst over guns, and so we're going to see a bigger push to get better control or limit or restrict gun sales, the use of guns, ammunition, and whatnot. Controlling information, we're seeing some censorship take place. We're seeing YouTube channels, social deplatforming, Facebook accounts being shut down, Twitter accounts being shut down, and culture, what they call cancel culture, which is basically if someone doesn't agree with what you're espousing or what you're putting out, what you're broadcasting, they will shut you down. If you do not agree with them, they will shut you down. They will encourage other people not to patronize your business and put pressure on you, intimidate you, to put you out of business or to silence your voice. And this is like another one of those free speech restrictions, pressure on free speech. So all of these are happening are purposeful and calculated. They're all focused on one thing, really, to destroy our republic in order to establish a socialist/Marxist style government. Another term you'll probably be introduced to if you haven't already is Christian nationalism. So this is where believers come into play. Okay, what is Christian nationalism? How is it looked at? Is it a danger to our society and whatnot? This has been an issue amongst what they call evangelicals. And it kind of has split. The church a bit along certain lines, particularly in name. Who supported Trump in the election and who didn't, and that seems to be like the the dividing line for all things evangelical. So, but Christian nationalism is something here. I'm going to read a little bit about it. It's a term that's become popular lately, and obviously being covered to a great extent by several universities and researchers and think tank type organizations that specialize in the study of social and psychological phenomena. In short, the definition of Christian nationalism is Christian-affiliated religious nationalism. Christian nationalists primarily focus on internal politics, such as passing laws that reflect their view of Christianity and its role in political and social life. So basically, this is what it is. It's believers exerting influence into policy and laws that, in their minds, espouse more of a biblical-based government style, on the surface, it seems okay to me and maybe to some others, but overall, it's not really seen in a positive light. Okay, because it's seen as promotion of a religion. It's seen as promotion of Christianity in particular, and in the secular world, this is a lot of pushback. And I've said in a few videos now that the earthly form of government and the heavenly form of government and that style is like a clash of two kingdoms. Okay, you have kingdom government, biblical values and principles, then you have secular government and secular principles. They don't always mesh very easily at all. Considering where we're at now in America, in the development and maturity of our country and our government, it's a battle, it's a clash. Very difficult to reconcile those two and get them to line up at all. So it is a frustrating and courageous battle by those who choose to enter that arena. So quite a few believers, can discern the times, and we see what's happening, and we feel that it's our duty and responsibility to influence politics, to preserve what God has established in and through the concept and nation of America, right? A free nation. Regardless of how you feel about Christian nationalism, whether you agree with it or not, or for that matter, whether you agree with the term or not, the truth is that America's foundations are being shaken to the core right now and will continue to shake and transform if nothing is done. So this is where I ask the questions in my mind. I said, what's God's plan for America? What is our destiny? And what is our role as believers? So for me, I struggled with the notion of Christian nationalism. I struggle with the notion of Christians heavily influencing government and politics. I wanted to grasp what our role as believers really is as we see all this turmoil around us and transformation taking place in America. So what is our role as a believer as well? I want to cover that a little bit. So, I prayed and I researched Christian nationalism to learn what it was. And I went down the rabbit hole. I went down a couple rabbit holes, so to speak, with Christian nationalism. I watched several videos by psychologists and sociologists and professors and places that do this type of research into this sort of phenomena. And quite a bit of information out there on this topic. You're going to need some tomes, maybe, or a pretty solid constitution to watch through it, because a lot of it is there, and it is definitely not obviously portrayed in a positive way. So Christian nationalism is seen as a danger to democracy, a danger to America. So anyway, a lot of believers, or a percentage of believers, feel it's our responsibility, spiritual and natural responsibility, really, to preserve the republic. And so I struggled with that. I thought, well, why? I mean, God's big. What would it matter if our style of government changed here in the United States? Of course, I love our freedoms. Most people do. But there has been ever since the creation of America, there's been an ever-increasing dependence on the government to supply our needs, to pass laws to protect people, to provide support to those in need, to help other countries, to serve internationally. For a long time, America was seen as the world's peacemaker. Now we're seen as the world's aggressor and not to be trusted because of some of the things that we have done over the last decades internationally that have damaged relationships with other countries. And there's been wars, lots of wars, and power grabs and opposition and whatnot. So most of you who know me know my background. I served in the U.S. Navy for 8 years on submarines, and I did it because I love my country, and I want to preserve our lifestyle. I want to preserve our means. And so what does that look like governmentally at this point? So the big question here, what does God say about America? I was really interested to know. I struggle with this, and I confessed this to some brothers at church a couple weeks back. And I said, I think I've got some studying and research to do and some praying. And one of my buddies, older fellow who is kind of a mentor to me at this point, at least he's spiritual. He influences me spiritually. I receive what he has to give me. Said, I recommend you reverse that order and pray first. So I said, good point, I'll do that. So I prayed and asked God one simple question. How do you feel about America? And God said, I love America. And I said, why? And God said, because they honored me. So simple, yet so powerful. Because they honored me. Our founding fathers, when establishing this great country, included God in their effort. They included and acknowledged God in our founding documents. They prayed for His divine wisdom. They acknowledged His sovereignty, His righteousness, His divine providence, His grace, and His love for us. And they chose to honor Him. And God liked that. America was and is the great experiment. I don't know of any other nation on the face of the earth that was established the way America was established, on the premise of freedom from tyranny, freedom from oppression, freedom to worship, and acknowledging God as our creator and provider of our freedoms. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as it's written. So what's happening now can be attributed to centuries of effort to destroy America by removing God. Breaking every connection, reference, acknowledgement, and mention of His name within our government, our schools, and institutions. You know, my pastor at the church I attend made this statement, and it really resonated with me. He said, we are sick socially, and we are sick spiritually. And he's so right. There's definitely a sickness in this country. And it's not pretty to see, it's not pretty to experience. But I want to expound on some of the things that he did mention. So we are socially sick. And I definitely want to talk about racism for a minute. Yes, there's racism in America. Plain and simple. We see it play out every single day. Has been and most likely always will be. But our media has chosen to cover it almost nonstop, 24/7, putting it front and center, particularly with regard to police violence against people of color. White police officers killing black people. It's tragic. It's tragic that it happens. But the bottom line is statistics don't support the level of coverage this is getting. So there's only one purpose for it, and that's to create and sustain division. Most of us don't encounter this. Most white people, in fact, hardly any white people probably encounter any of this. I have spoken with several, handful, maybe a dozen, black people that I'm associated with. And some have not experienced it, and some seem to experience it quite a bit. So I don't think there's any rule of thumb. I mean, if it's happening, it's happening. And it needs to be stopped as much as possible. But the coverage that it's getting, it just seems to be geared toward creating and sustaining this tension, this division, this anger. And, we're seeing it play out all across the country. Gender confusion. Forced acceptance and governance of numerous genders. Anyone who doesn't agree with and is non-accepting of this lifestyle is labeled a homophobe and most likely a racist. It's okay to disagree with someone's lifestyle. It's not okay to discriminate against them, though. It's not okay to treat them any differently. you know. But anytime you don't agree with this, then you get the label. And it's very difficult to have a conversation at that point or to interact at that point, you know. The other thing we've seen socially is the feminization of men. The role of men being redefined as one of subservience, one of passivity, one of compliance. The nuclear family being castigated and demonized by the feminist and women's movements and Marxist organizations. Wholesome family values being categorized as white are being attacked. Whiteness being defined, sold, and taught as oppressive, controlling, and hate-filled. So socially, got a little melting pot there, got a little soup, a little stew going on there that we're having to negotiate right now as a country. Spiritually, what are we seeing spiritually? What is the spiritual sickness aspect? We're seeing forceful attempts to shut down public Christian gatherings and services. Continued effort of removing God from public and private society. We also see a lot of folks making God in their own image, or even making themselves God. And so, self-love, that's the most important thing. You know, you have to love yourself before you love others. You have to, the espousing of one as being in unity with the universe, or one with self, or some other thing. And then exalting things above God, basically idolatry of all sorts. Idolatry of government, worshiping false gods, worship of self over love of God, love of power, love of money, etc., etc. So we are a world full of idols, you know. So what do we do? What do we do as believers? God loves America. That's what I feel. I feel like God loves America, and the world needs what America has. We are rich in resources. Our economy is the richest economy on the face of the world. We have the ability to help others like no other country does. There is a reason to fight spiritually and even possibly physically against the darkness covering the land. As my pastor, Rick Joyner, would say, a civil war does seem possible. In fact, he's been preaching this, I believe he said, since the 80s, that there is a potential civil war coming. I don't say it lightly either, because I do still struggle with this whole idea of physically protecting my rights. I struggle with the possibility of a physical altercation, in particular with someone that I know who has been tasked by an authority figure to limit my constitutional freedoms, whether that is come and take a gun or prevent me from doing something that is a granted freedom, God-given freedom, or a state-given freedom. Very difficult. I do struggle with it. And best thing I'm doing right now is I'm preparing. I'm preparing for an eventual altercation that will shut things down, that will limit our ability to get hands on necessary resources. And I would really encourage you to do the same thing if you haven't already. Seriously think about it, because we're probably closer. 6 months ago, I did it was in December. I did a video where I felt like the Lord was telling me there's a big shaking coming this year. I didn't know when, didn't know what the timing was, didn't know if it was in a week or a month or a year. But He was very clear with me, and he told me that he is going to, there's something is going to happen that will shake the political and financial markets. And I do believe we're on the verge of a financial collapse, possibly an international scale financial collapse. So what's going to be worth anything once that happens? It's probably behoove us to do some research here and make sure that we're prepared. We will need to have tangible things in our hands to be able to survive and eat, drink, protect ourselves, and whatnot. So, but whatever happens, all that, right? So that was a lot, actually. That was probably deeper than I've ever gone in any one of my videos. And it's been about 2 months since I've put a video out. But I felt like this all was coming together over time. It did take some time for it to come together, and I felt like the Lord said it's time to release this one. And so I want to be obedient with that. And if you're on YouTube, or I don't know what other video sites there are, but Facebook, you're probably seeing some similar things. I am not one to try to put a timeline on things, because God, quite honestly, hasn't told me. I mean, if I did feel like I heard a timeline, I probably wouldn't be comfortable enough to share it. But I did feel like it is coming, and it might happen this year. And we're already in April, end of April, so that's a third of the year already behind us. We're seeing this pandemic shift things all around the world. We're seeing some still major outbreaks in a lot of European and Asian countries right now that are just hurting bad from this COVID. Fortunately, in the United States, we seem to have turned a corner. And from what I understand, we'll have a vaccine surplus by mid to end of May. And so that's encouraging. And so again, we have resources to help people out. And at this point, it's probably important for us to do that. So we'll see how the current administration responds. Right now, it has not been so great. But my goal is not to critique the current administration. Anyway, after saying all that, I want to encourage you, all right, to do the things you need to do to prepare. Also, just remember, God's in control of this whole thing. He is in control. Jesus didn't come to the earth to oppose or tear down earthly governments. He came to break religious oppression, really. The main thing for believers is to be prepared. Pray and prepare. Ask God what your role is, but it is most certainly needed. Once you get it, start moving. Take tangible steps to accomplish what He's calling you to do. Get involved, stay active, discern the times, and intercede for America. Thank you. Peace, and God bless you.